It has been an emotional, poignant day here in Portsmouth. The ceremony around lunchtime included speeches and readings from world leaders. But by far the warmest applause of the day was reserved for those veterans themselves as they took the stage. There are not many left who can recall the horror of D-Day firsthand, most of them pushing 100 years old or more. And this may very well be the final time a major anniversary of this significant day is marked in the presence of the men who were there. At the moment, 300 of them are on a specialist chartered cruise liner, the Boudica, which should be coming around the corner out into the main part of the bay into which Portsmouth Harbour reaches. There she is, the Boudica. 300 of those veterans are aboard, aged 90 to 101, all of them having seen active service on those Normandy beaches. You can hear the helicopters above us, you can see the frigates in the bay, you can just see the ships galore. Now joining us is Cathy Burke, Emeritus Professor of History at University College London, and Rear Admiral Alex Burton, formerly of the Royal Navy. Alex, what have we seen? What have we got here? This fine-looking boat.
Good evening, John. This is Her Majesty Canadian ship St. John's, and she's part of their Atlantic fleet, recently operated in the Mediterranean and in the Atlantic. And the Canadians, of course, took a major part of D-Day.
Now, is that because we want to show the scale of the alliance or because we're short of ships?
Absolutely, showing the scale of the alliance. We've plenty of ships in the Navy. You've just seen the Queen Elizabeth behind you there in Portsmouth Harbour.
But too big to participate in this parade, it seems.
Not too big to participate in the parade, but she was a centrepiece for both the start and the end, where the Prime Minister waved off the veterans in Boudica.
We saw the Prime Minister there waving on the deck. And of course, in many ways, it's waving goodbye to her term of office, which comes to an end this weekend. Now, there's also the little police boat at the back. I don't know, I mean, is he worried about the security of this particular vessel?
Well, there is a large flotilla of ships, and clearly security is of importance for all vessels going in and out of Portsmouth. But the vessels you saw leaving before the Boudica were the fast patrol vessels of the Royal Navy that are manned by our university students across the country.
Now, Professor Cathy Burke, why is this so significant? I mean, is this kind of a goodbye to a bygone age, or is it teaching us about a future age?
Well, it's both. It's a memory, of course, remembrance, which is at least as important here as an international, but it's trying to remind people of the benefits and the values of cooperation, that working together, that if you cooperate, if you trust each other, wonderful things can be accomplished, like survival, for example.
What an extraordinary time to be doing so, because we have an American president who's questioning to what extent we should really be cooperating with each other, and we have a situation in Britain where we're thinking of not cooperating with the European Union.
It's all very sad, I must say. I mean, what they're trying to do for President Trump, of course, is provide a layer underneath his rhetoric to show just what the context is. I mean, he probably never really thought of Omaha Beach before. He's now going to be able to see it and see what was actually accomplished, led by the Americans, of course, but surrounded by Canadians, Poles, Norwegians, British in particular, from Great Britain.
But is this the death throes of that alliance? Is this a kind of goodbye to a bygone age, or is there here the seed of some future alliance that will be appropriate to the modern world?
Well, it depends on what you mean by that, I think. I think in terms of an Anglo-American very strong relationship, it's going to decline because alliances need contributions by both sides. And as the British military facilities goes down, it will not have the same resonance, the same use. And Britain withdrawing from Europe is a very great blow to British influence with the United States.
So you're nodding your head, Rear Admiral, and one senses that there are people who have either recently left the Navy or are still in it who really worry about its future?
I mean, a relationship is a form of two parts, and we as a country need to stand up, as we have done, toe to toe against the Americans. The 2 points that Kathy makes, I think undoubtedly we will have to work hard to retain our position of strength as a single country rather than as part of the EU. On a military side, the government has huge ambitions for the military, but the National Audit Office have made it quite clear that currently those ambitions are unaffordable, and we need to see them deliver them.
Well, now let's go to Andy Davis, who is on the shore, very close to the Queen Elizabeth. And the interesting thing is that he has actually spent time on the Boudica. He's mixed with this extraordinary band of nonagenarians. Andy.
John, not all nonagenarians. There are two on board who are 101 years old. They're a very, very special group of people, and I was on board for 2 days, and there they were, sharing anecdotes, rekindling old friendships, making new friendships, some of them dancing into the night. I mean, they were injecting this irrepressible energy into the atmosphere on board that ship, and everyone was getting caught up in it. And there are some real characters on board with extraordinary stories. One woman who was in the Royal Observer Corps, she was plotting planes. And then you had her husband there, who wasn't giving interviews, but he was one who had been on the Halifax bombers as they were flying into Normandy. So some incredibly memorable scenes, and they now head off on this very poignant leg of their journey, heading back to Normandy, and there are some on board who've never been back in 75 years. So that will be a moment for reflection, huge moment for all of them on board and all of the carers and family members who are joining them as they head back tomorrow. And that moment tomorrow on one of the old Mulberry harbours, that artificial harbour that was brought in after the D-Day invasion, when a lone piper at 7:26 tomorrow will play, signalling the moment when the first British troops landed on Gold Beach. But today, it was all about Portsmouth, such a major embarkation point during that period, when there was a service of commemoration here today, the day when D-Day was supposed to happen, but got called off and delayed because of bad weather. Slowly and carefully, they walked onto the stage. Behind them an image of those emblematic landing craft which sent so many of them once to war, to Nazi-occupied Normandy on June the 6th, 1944, D-Day. And then came the moment of the day. Nearby on Portsmouth South Sea Common, thousands joined in as 99-year-old former platoon sergeant John Jenkins took centre stage.
I was 12 years old when I landed on Gold Beach. Sorry, 23 years old. I put my age back a bit. I'm honoured to be stood here today in front of so many other veterans.
When I attended the commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the D-Day landings, some thought it might be the last such event. But the wartime generation, my generation, is resilient, and I'm delighted to be with you in Portsmouth today.
Joining the 300 or so D-Day veterans in Portsmouth today were world leaders from the 14 Allied nations that took part in the invasion. American, Canadian, Dutch, Polish, among others. Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel was there too. The earlier photocall had America's increasingly isolationist president,
if you could please look at the camera,
hosted by a Britain increasingly isolated in Europe.
Grim scenes on the beaches.
Now recalling partnerships of old, intricately bound in the politics of war. One president reading the D-Day prayer of another, Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, the heroic servants, into thy kingdom.
let me first thank you sincerely on behalf of my nation.
The French president read the letter of a resistance fighter executed at 16.
Form T-Rex!
Theresa May, one written by a captain to his wife and found on his body the day after D-Day.
I can imagine you in the garden, having tea with Janie and Anne, getting ready to put them to bed. Although I would give anything to be back with you, I have not yet had any wish at all to back down from the job we have to do.
Fierce fighting lay ahead of them beyond the beaches.
That job saw thousands die on Normandy's beaches, and among those who witnessed the horror, who came today to reflect, was 97-year-old Alfred Fuzzard.
We started picking up bodies, and we picked up one. And I was the petty officer, and I was the senior chap, so I had to sew him up for burial. So I searched his clothes, and he had a picture of his lovely wife. She was a lovely girl with 2 children, and I cried. And it affects me even now when I think about it, because I think, what the hell is this all about?
This afternoon, the Prime Minister, members of the royal family and President Trump met some of the veterans. One of whom, 93-year-old Thomas Cuthbert, clearly taken with the First Lady, is heard joking, "If I was 20 years younger."
If I was 20 years younger, you could handle it, no question.
You could handle it, no question about it, replies the President. This was a day laden with modern military spectacle, and below the scrutiny of the sniper teams, there were songs of resistance and nostalgia too. On the eve of the D-Day anniversary, when once this scene was a mass of troops, more than 150,000 across the coastline, waiting for that order to invade.
Andy Davis reporting. Well, now Kathy Burke, Emeritus Professor of History at University College London, and former Rear Admiral Alex Burton of the Royal Navy, still with us here. And I'd just like to ask you, Professor, what you made of today's event?
Well, I must admit, I've got all choked up, especially watching the Boudica go past. I mean, it's you can know about it, you can read about it, you can even hear about it from your grandfather. But actually seeing it here, it's just the emotion is what takes over. The analysis goes, and you can just feel it. I mean, both my parents were officers in the war, and I've heard a bit, and my grandfather in the First World War. But I've never actually been at a place where where it just rises from the water. It's quite wonderful.
Rear Admiral?
I was at an extraordinary commemoration, and as you say, a pageant, John. But I think it's the personal stories that really bring to life the staggering heroism of airmen, sailors, and soldiers.
Well, I spoke to Harry Reid, the parachutist who dropped in 1944 and was 95 and is 95 and has dropped again today, as Matt reported, and survived. And I must admit, I have never cried in an interview before, but he made me cry. And that is the kind of event that these veterans have made it.
They do, and you speak to most military people serving and retired, and they do it for a cause, they do it for their country, but they stay there for their colleagues next to them, and that's what he'll remember, those that fell.
Well, we'll see you again at the end of the programme, but thank you in the meantime very warmly. Well, all of the veterans of the Normandy landings who were able to be here today are, in a sense, the ever-shrinking band of servicemen with first-hand memories of the invasion. Earlier, I spent some time with 3 of them, recalling what it was like for the day which changed the course of history. Double-rotored choppers flying clouded skies above where so many soldiers once set off for Normandy's beaches on the eve of D-Day. On the ground here today, crowds gathering for this 75th anniversary. Memories of those times in black and white, but still in vivid colour for those like John Jenkins, who survived.
Terrified. Terrified, yeah. Yeah, inside you're terrified. Outside you mustn't show it. So So that's all I can say about it. And I presume myself I'm lucky to be here today at the age of 99.
But once you were on the beach, and you had to look after yourself, I mean,
oh, yeah.
Where did you sleep? What did you eat?
Oh, what did we eat? Well, we had a 24-hour ration pack, and in there was such a thing as a can of self-heating soup. Self-heating soup. And there was a few sweets in there, and biscuits and things like that. And right at the very bottom was always Army Form Blanc.
Amazing.
You know what Army Form Blanc is?
No, I don't.
Toilet paper.
Oh, my God.
6 sheets of it.
Jim Healey was 19 on D-Day. He's now 94.
I was coxswain of the landing craft that took the Canadians in.
So you were ramming it up against the shore and they were jumping off?
Yeah.
How many lads would you be carrying?
I carried 33.
Gosh. 33. I wonder how many of them survived.
Oh. I wonder. I bottom. There's no trace, no way you can trace that.
No.
We lost 10 landing crafts on that trip.
Really?
10 of them.
And you were actually there on D-Day, landing
on the
first
assault, yeah.
Gosh. Because there was very heavy fire, wasn't there?
Oh, yes. I was saying to them, I said it too old. They weren't firing snowballs at us, you know.
Douglas Smith flew 3 bombing runs over Normandy on D-Day, but he was already himself lucky to be alive at all.
One particular evening, we were due to bomb Hanover, and during the day I was taken ill with tonsillitis. So, that, of course, you were not allowed to fly unless you were 100%. So I had to miss out. My crew went to Hanover, and
they were shot down.
And they were shot down.
So it's a miracle you were alive to be at D-Day, and another miracle that you're alive today.
Yes, if I wasn't that tonsillitis.
4,500 Allied troops died on D-Day. I went back to Sergeant John Jenkins for his thoughts. And what will your thoughts be?
Yeah, it's a jump to say what my thoughts would be. I suppose I should think back on the chaps that did come back. That's the main thing, I suppose. You've got to think of them who are over there in Bayeux Cemetery.
John Jenkins, brackets, 99 years old. Well, the so-called D-Day proclamation, signed earlier by the 16 countries represented here today, pledged to resolve international tensions peacefully. Along with Theresa May, the Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt was also here in Portsmouth, and I caught up with her. I asked her about some of the tensions of our time. I began by asking her about the comments from the Russian Foreign Minister, Mr. Lavrov, who tweeted that it was the Soviet Union which broke the backbone of the Nazi forces. Why wasn't Russia represented here today?
Our relationship with Russia, for very obvious reasons, is not in a good place. We've no quarrel with the Russian people. We should remember the immense efforts that Russia made in the Second World War that were absolutely considerable. But today is not about that. It is about our veterans here, and the spotlight should be on those men. This could be our last chance to say thank you to them, and so that's what we should be concentrating on today.
Now, it was very much the Second World War that brought about the decision by so many countries to form the European Union. If we'd talked about this at the 50th anniversary, we would not have ever dreamt that we would leave. Is there now a danger that in 25 years' time we'll have left NATO too?
I don't think so. I think the alliance is very strong. The United States, although people have criticised some of the things that the President has said, they are the major contributors towards NATO. What they're arguing is that others need to also step up. But my job is to look at ways we can strengthen that alliance, but we're doing great work together around the world.
But now is the time, surely, to be looking at what we should be doing about our defences and our relationships with other countries, and what do we do if the United States do move away from protecting us, because we are protected by them.
Well, it's in all our interests that we work together through alliances like NATO. There's no good us spending money on other initiatives or other defence partnerships that aren't going to actually yield the hard power and the capability that we all need. That's what we need to concentrate on. That's what NATO has delivered, and I'm very confident that the alliance will remain strong.
Royal Navy, beautiful, very nice looking, but the truth is a shadow of what it was.
The Navy is in good shape. We have brought back capabilities that we lost. We've regenerated those, incredibly complex projects. The aircraft carrier Queen Elizabeth is off the coast here. I'm going to be on deck waving off those veterans in Boudica. That is Carrier Strike Force coming back. And we need to regenerate other capabilities as well as invent new capabilities to cope with emerging threats. I can tell you the Royal Navy is in good shape.
In better shape than the Conservative Party?
Well, today I think the focus should be on not the Conservative Party, but these amazing veterans. That's what I'm going to be doing today.
Secretary of State, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Thank you.
Thanks.
Today, obviously, the focus has been on the memory of the people who fought and died on the beaches in Normandy, but there is a feeling hanging over it all. There's been a strange sense of nostalgia for what may have been the high point of the cooperation of Western nations. Brexit angst now dominates the discourse between Britain and Europe, and following President Trump's visit, where does the special relationship between the US and the UK stand, if it ever existed properly? Joining me again to discuss this is Professor Cathy Burke, Emeritus, Professor of History at University College London, and Rear Admiral Alex Burton, formerly of the Royal Navy, and from London we have Anne Applebaum, the columnist for the Washington Post. Anne Applebaum, you're a great East-West specialist, but I want you to focus for a moment on West-West. Do you have any sense that there is a special relationship any longer between the UK and the US?
Well, first of all, it's important to remember that the special relationship is based on a lot more than one president or even one queen. It goes back many decades. It's based on a common language. It's based on hundreds of people Americans working for British companies, Brits working for American companies, culture, and so on. And all of that will remain no matter who is the president and who is the leader of the royal family. However, I think it's important on this D-Day to remember that we do have, for the first time, a very different kind of American president. One who uses the expression America first to describe his policies, deliberately harking back to the isolationist movement of the 1930s and 1940s, who, had it been in charge, had there been such a president in the 1940s, there would have been no D-Day. He's somebody who has written multiple times, dating back to a book he wrote in 2000, that he doesn't believe in the wars in Europe were a waste of time, that our European allies are a waste of time. So he does make a break in a long tradition of American sort of dedication to and commitment to Europe.
That's an amazing point, that had Trump been in power, there would have been no D-Day if he'd been in power at that time. Professor?
I don't quite agree with that, because Japan did bomb Pearl Harbor, and Hitler immediately declared war on the United States. Even Trump, I think, would not have backed away from American territory being attacked. But I take the point, if there hadn't been, the United States was bombed into both the First and Second World Wars. The question is whether they would join either, but they were bombed into them. And that's a fact that you can't object to.
Well, Rear Admiral, from a naval point of view, I mean, how close is the relationship? I mean, I noticed it was a Norwegian frigate that went down behind the ship with the veterans on it.
Yeah, I've had 31 years service in the Royal Navy, and I can't think of a day when I was not engaged with my peers within the US Navy and across NATO. I mean, I think your point is compelling, which is there's never been a more important time for strengthening coalitions with some of the threats from Russia, big states, and terrorism. So the importance of coalitions are imperative. Our relationship on a military level with the United States is extremely strong.
Well, Anne Applebaum, you know, if we'd been at the 50th anniversary of D-Day, we could not conceivably have thought that Britain would be disengaging from the European Union. And one therefore wonders, might we one day disengage from NATO? Might America?
Look, the last thing I want to see is any harm coming to NATO. I think NATO is it's not just a pillar of security for the West and for all of us. It's also a symbol of democracy. It's had an enormous amount of good in the world. However, I also think that it would be naive to pretend that we can go on assuming everything will continue to be the same the way it always has. In other European capitals, certainly in Paris, to some extent in Berlin, although they're very nervous about talking about it, people are beginning to plan for a post-NATO Europe. They're talking about it, they're thinking about it, and it would be very dangerous for the British not to be privately, quietly talking about that as well. And I hope they are doing so with their NATO allies, European allies.
Well, I'm bound also to ask you, therefore, about Russia. It is very interesting that Mr. Lavrov bothered to say he wished he'd been invited because Russia won the war on the Eastern Front and thereby enabling the D-Day to take place. Does he have a point? Should he have been here? And by not having him here, does it simply make matters yet worse?
Russia has been at past World War II ceremonies, including some in Normandy. So it's not unprecedented for the Russians to take part. But no, I think it's, it reflects a real divide. What Russia's foreign policy today is dedicated to breaking up NATO and to breaking up the European Union. Russia funds anti-NATO and anti-EU political parties, runs disinformation campaigns in European countries. And so, of course, it makes sense that we wouldn't want Russia on an occasion when we're celebrating our alliances.
Do you agree with that, Professor? Would you have had Russia here?
Well, we might have asked. Then they would have no complaint.
Why, they wouldn't have come?
Well, who knows the inwardness of the Russian mind in this sense? But I think it might have been politic, but I can't see its politic here. Russia had nothing to do with D-Day, and this is D-Day, not the war.
And when you knock around the world in the Navy, is Russia still the bogey?
There are several foes. I think I'll pick up on one point, which is I think it would be strategically naive to think that Europe could provide the sort of strategic buttress against Russia and other threats that NATO is providing at the moment. So there are many bogeymen that come and go, but Europe at the moment can't stand.
Anne Applebaum in London, thank you very much for joining us. Kathy Burke, Professor Emeritus History of University College London, and Rear Admiral Alex Burton, the Navy. Thank you very much indeed.
This place was absolutely crucial in the first hours of D-Day because this is where the Allied troops had to secure this river and this bridge in order to prevent the Germans from launching a counter-offensive and thus creating another Dunkirk. Now this really is sacred ground for the business of remembrance. Tomorrow morning, the world's leaders that were in Portsmouth today will be a few miles upriver on the beaches to commemorate D-Day. But today, there were hundreds of veterans right here at Pegasus Bridge, and for them it was a deeply personal business. Watch. 75 years ago, the skies above Normandy filled with aircraft, thousands of them silently disgorging the liberators onto the mayhem below, as the beaches were being swamped by Allied landing craft. If it seemed like a suicide mission, that's because it was, for a quarter of the men who came. One of those who defied the odds was Jock Hutton. Here he was today, jumping out of an aircraft again, at the age of 94.
You ready, Jock?
Saluting his fellow airmen and his fallen comrades. Marie Scott didn't come by parachute or by boat, but by black cab, part of a fleet of London taxis commandeered by a charity that takes veterans to Normandy every year. She'd come to receive France's highest award,
Marie Scott,
the Légion d'honneur, for the crucial work that she did as a communications officer, linking Central Command under General Eisenhower in Portsmouth to the troops on the front in Normandy.
And when they lifted their lever, You were in the middle of a battle. You could hear so clearly loud gunfire, machine gun fire, shells. I mean, I doubt if I could have differentiated between those sounds, but for me, it was just loud, sustained gunfire.
That must have been terrifying to listen
yes,
to.
It was.
It fired up the imagination.
Absolutely. You're suddenly made aware of the true enormity of war. You know, nobody's playing on those fields, on those battlefields. Those beaches, people weren't sunbathing. You know, men were dying, being maimed. I don't know. I think maybe I grew up on that day.
They all grew up on that day, and their sacrifice created the world in which we in Europe have lived and prospered for the last 75 years. At the time, things looked very different.
All of us felt this was such a big gamble, and we just fervently hoped it would pay off. But for some people, and for many thousands, it didn't.
We've, because of the efforts that you and your generation made, we have come to take peace for granted in Europe.
We have indeed. But
Should we take it?
No. It's too fragile. It saddens me to see so much intolerance around.
The somber poignancy of this occasion competes with the festival atmosphere of remembrance. There are the marching bands competing for attention. And of course the stories, told by a dwindling number of those who were actually there, listened to by those who can't stop wondering what it was like.
Cheers.
Roy Cardman, here again today, there 75 years ago at Pegasus Bridge, a strategically vital crossing of the Orne Canal a few miles from the beach, where under the hail of bullets he made an unlikely friend for life.
But as we crossed the bridge, it was under fire from a Spando about 400 yards up the canal, and it was spraying the bridge, and we had to run across. But as we came up towards it, Arlette was a little girl of 5, and she was up in the top window waving a French flag, wasn't it?
That's right.
Yeah. You were in the window of the cafe here that you still live.
Not only was I up in the window, but I also was about amongst the wounded. They had arrived to give us the freedom, and Daddy had actually warned us with Mummy. But naturally, for a little child to be given chocolates and biscuits, they adopted us because they'd left their little kids at home, and we adopted them.
One thing that's striking is how the men and women of then feel that they've earned the right to judge the politicians of today.
I was quite happy as being part of Europe. Our money was high, the pound was high, everybody seemed to be happy, but all of a sudden, wallop, we're now fighting like mad.
D-Day was and still is the biggest military operation in history, a catalogue of thousands of personal sacrifices with consequences that changed a continent and a century in ways that few could have imagined. Matt Fry, Channel 4 News, at Pegasus Bridge in Normandy.
So 94-year-old Harry Reid parachuting out of a plane, recreating the jump he would have made 75 years ago. Matt Fry spoke to him earlier.
Different kind of jump, different motivation, different reception. I didn't have someone like you waiting to have a little chat with me when I landed on D-Day. In fact, the people who were waiting for me didn't really want me to be there. They were not very kind. They were prepared to shoot me. So it's different, isn't it?